Well, greetings, vinyl community. Today I'm going to be bending your ear a little about one of my favorite bands from the 1960s, the Nice. And the Nice, I think, are an overlooked band in rock music history. They're thought of as kind of a footnote in the history of Emerson, Lake and Palmer. They were the precursor band to Emerson, Lake and Palmer, and they were very much along the same sort of blueprint. They were for most of their history, a three-piece band spearheaded by Keith Emerson, although they did start out as a quartet. And they had a lot of classical and jazz adaptations into their rock music, as did Emerson, Lake and Palmer. The Nice was a much more raw band, however. Emerson, Lake and Palmer obviously took that approach and polished it up a lot. They brought in the synthesizers and a much more bombastic approach, whereas the Nice was very much a raw live act. And as you'll see, many of their records incorporated live material. They only ever made 2 completely studio albums out of their 5-album output. The Nice were formed in 1967 to be a backing band slash opening act for the singer P.P. Arnold, who at the time was riding high on her big hit, The First Cut is the Deepest, which has been covered many times since. Her chauffeur recommended, because she was dissatisfied with her band at the time, her chauffeur recommended Keith Emerson to her to be the new music director and assemble a new backing band. Keith Emerson was playing with a band called the VIPs at the time. So he took the job with P.P. Arnold, and he called on the bass player from his previous band, the T-Bones, one Lee Jackson. And there was space needed for a guitar player, so they got Davjack List from a band called The Attack. The original drummer was Ian Hague. Ian Hague didn't fit in well with the rest of the band, so he didn't last very long. Before the Nice made any records of their own, he was replaced by the drummer from The Attack, Brian Davison, known to his friends as Blinky. The gig with P.P. Arnold went on for a while. They did some sessions with her, and those did not go well. They were replaced on the record with, various members were replaced with studio musicians, and they say they can't recognize any of their own playing on the results. P.P. Arnold had to go back to America at some point, so the band just continued on their own as a separate 4-piece, and they were building quite a reputation on the live circuit. So they made their first album, The Thoughts of Emerlist Davjack, obviously a portmanteau of the band's names, Emerson, O'List, Davison, and Jackson. And they got a lot of mileage out of this photograph, this photo session with the saran wrap or whatever that is. This does include some long instrumental pieces. Their signature tune, Rondo, which was an adaptation of Blue Rondo a la Turk by Dave Brubeck. The Dave Brubeck recording is quite quirky in its rhythm. It's in a 9/8 rhythm, but the Nice just steamroller right through that, turned it into 4/4, and made it a long jam vehicle for their live shows. So that shows up at the end of side 1 on here, followed by the beginning of side 2, another long instrumental piece, War and Peace, which is basically just a blues format. Otherwise, the album opens with Flower King of Flies and the title track, Thoughts of Emerlist Davjack, which are very poppy, very different from what the Nice kind of evolved into. Thoughts of Emerlist Davjack in particular is almost like sunshine pop. It opens with this bright sunshine pop kind of ba-ba-ba vocal harmony. It reminds me a lot of Happy Together by the Turtles. Some people have said it reminds them of the Beach Boys. But it goes through a lot of different moods. After that intro, there's this sort of classical harpsichord thing that goes on. The vocal enters, and it's kind of a ruminative, introspective vocal part. And it goes through different tempos and moods in a pretty short time. This was released as their first single. In addition, there's a very psychedelic freak-out track called Dawn, which is spoken rather than sung. It's poetry with weird, crazy psychedelic music going on behind it. And there are a couple of nice hard rock tracks, Bonnie K and Tantalizing Maggie. So, nicely well-rounded album for their debut. The second album found the group reduced to a trio. Emerlist got the sack. He was having some trouble getting along with the rest of the band. And I think there was some tension over an incident in 1968 when the Nice promoted their new single, which was a cover of America from West Side Story, done as an instrumental, with an introduction borrowed from Dvorak's New World Symphony. So you've got that classical show music, rock, jazz amalgamation. And it's sort of clever to have the New World Symphony grafted onto a version of America. To promote this, they had a concert at the Royal Albert Hall, and Keith Emerson performed a stunt where he burned a replica of the American flag. It was actually not a real flag. It was a big sheet of paper that he spray painted a flag, the stripes of a flag onto. Apparently it already had cut out stars on it, and set fire to it. And that led to the band being banned from the Royal Albert Hall. But it brought them a lot of negative publicity, both at home and abroad, but it definitely got some word out on them. The second album, this is an American copy, on the Immediate label, as the first was. This American copy does include the Nice's version of America, so it does have Emerlist on it. The rest of the album is performed by the Emerson, Jackson, Davison trio version of the Nice, which is the configuration that the band would continue on through the rest of their history. The British album did not include the single of America. It began with Daddy, Where Did I Come From? A little song about telling one's child the facts of life. And an interesting departure on this album is that Keith Emerson does some vocalizing. And it gives you a good idea of why Keith Emerson has very rarely sung on record, because his voice, Lee Jackson's voice to begin with, is an acquired taste. A lot of people really dislike the Nice because of Lee Jackson's voice. But Keith Emerson's voice, that makes Lee sound like Caruso, let me tell you. There's a song called Happy Freuds, which is, I think, very Zappa influenced. So you get Emerson singing on that. Very cool little jazzy thing, Little Arabella, with a just nice, airy organ sound. And the big classical influence comes on at the end of side one with the intermezzo from Karelia's Suite by the Finnish composer Jan Sibelius. Side two is taken up with a side-long suite titled Ars Longa Vita Brevis, with the band joined by an orchestra. It begins with an orchestral prelude, followed by the first movement Awakening, which is simply a drum solo by Brian Davison. Then the main song part, second movement Realization, which features some guitar, which is a little mysterious because they no longer had their guitar player. That was just a session musician used for that. Third movement, Acceptance, Brandenburger. This is an adaptation of the third Brandenburg Concerto by Johann Sebastian Bach, so more of that classical influence. Fourth movement, Denial, is a reprise of the Ars Longa Vita Brevis song from the second movement, and Coda, Extension to the Big Note. There's that Zappa influence again, because the big note is a concept that Zappa mentioned on his album Lumpy Gravy, which would have been a pretty new album at the time this was recorded. And to prove that that's what the Nice had in mind, they actually covered the opening theme from Lumpy Gravy on one of their BBC sessions, which we'll get to later on. The third album by the Nice was titled simply Nice, except for its second issue in America, where it was retitled Everything as Nice as Mother Makes It. When I first heard the Nice on the radio, this is what I heard. I was already a big fan of Emerson, Lake and Palmer. But hearing Keith Emerson in the context of the Nice was very exciting, and the records were not easy to find. I basically found everything else until I finally found a copy of this. This was a reissue from 1973 of the album originally released in 1969. This is from Columbia Special Products, not actually the immediate label. So this is the beginning of the inclusion of live material on their album. Side 1 is studio, side 2 is live at the Fillmore East. The studio tracks consist of Azrael Revisited, which is a remake of the B-side from their first single, which was Thoughts of Emerlist Davjack. Nice little moving piece in 5/4 time. I think the revisit here is actually a lot more accomplished, more polished than the B-side version. This is followed by a cover of Tim Buckley, not Tim Buckley, but Tim Hardin's Hang On to a Dream. And we will hear a lot of covers from the Nice. They did not really have all that much original material, so that's one aspect of their doing all the classical adaptations. They weren't prolific as songwriters. Their recording career was short, but they did manage to squeeze out 5 albums worth of material in that time, so a lot of it was from outside songwriters. Hang On to a Dream has a very nice jazzy piano feel, and would reappear in a live version on their later album Elegy with a very expanded version of that piano break. Diary of an Empty Day is another classical adaptation, this time with lyrics added to the movement from the Sinfonia Española by Eduard Lalo, but just credited to Emerson and Jackson. And finally, a really nice semi-epic piece, or of semi-epic proportions, For Example, which goes through a lot of changes in its, 6 minute, there are no timings on the record, but it couldn't be much more than 6 or 7 minutes, if that. It does include a very cool quote where the brass section pops up out of nowhere just to play a few bars of Norwegian Wood. Side 2, the live side, recorded at the Fillmore East, is just 2 tracks. Rondo 69, which obviously is a remake of Rondo from their first album, and 69 presumably refers to the year, not to anything else that Rondo might conjure up an image of. And the rest of the side is an epic, truly epic performance of She Belongs to Me by Bob Dylan, which is just extrapolated off into the stratosphere that you can get. It must be about 12 minutes long. And that's not a song that sounds like it would support that kind of jamming, but it truly does. It's an amazing, amazing performance. And I think that may have been the first thing I ever heard by the Nice on the radio. There was that, and there was For Example, both from this album. So I went hunting for the Nice's albums, but the immediate stuff was already out of print. So most of what you would find would be just the recordings they'd switched labels. They were on Charisma in the UK, but for us Americans, we got these albums on Mercury. The first album released on Mercury was Five Bridges in 1970. And this was an almost entirely live album. There was only one studio track included, the very last track on the album, One of Those People. Side one of the album is devoted to another side-long suite, this time in 5 movements, the Five Bridges suite. Each movement is named for a bridge. Well, it's just called First Bridge, Second Bridge, and so on. These represent the 5 bridges that at that time crossed the Tyne River in Newcastle. Apparently there are now 7 bridges, so the album is overdue for a revision. But, sadly, Keith Emerson's no longer with us to do that. The first movement is the Fantasia, First Bridge, and this is a piece for the orchestra with Keith Emerson coming in with a piano piece in the middle. Second Bridge is the band itself performing a song section. Then there's a chorale, Third Bridge, which is a very slow song with Lee Jackson's very mournful vocals accompanied by the orchestra alternating with interludes by the band playing a jazzy piano theme. The fourth movement is High Level Fugue, Fourth Bridge. Apparently High Level Bridge is the name of one of those 5 bridges. This is a piano fugue by Emerson, accompanied by percussion from Brian Davison. And the finale, Fifth Bridge, is a reprise of the second movement, very much the same sort of structure as on Ars Longa, Vita, Brevis, where they repeat the song that is the second movement as the fifth movement. And the Nice is joined here by just a brass section rather than the full orchestra. Side 2 has the live version of the intermezzo from the Corelia Suite, which is also on the Ars Longa Vita Brevis album, followed by the third movement from Tchaikovsky's Sixth Symphony, the Pathétique Symphony, and these are both the Nice with the orchestra. And the side is rounded out with Country Pie / Brandenburg Concerto No. 6, which is another Bob Dylan cover. They did like their Dylan. All of these last 3 albums include Dylan covers. So Dylan's Country Pie combined with a theme from the 6th Brandenburg Concerto. And you'll remember that they used the 3rd Brandenburg Concerto on Ars Longa Vita Brevis for Brandenburger. And that studio track previously alluded to, One of Those People, which is Lee Jackson telling us what a pervert he is. Sort of self-advertisement, like a body ad, I think, a body commercial. That's what Frank Zappa called it on the first Mothers of Invention album when they did Motherly Love. So the band split in 1970. The last concert was, I think, the end of March 1970, March or April. And this album was released posthumously, Elegy. This is a German copy, actually, that has the gatefold. Cover by Hypnosis, as was the cover of the Five Bridges album. And in fact, I don't think I showed that gatefold, so you didn't get the full sort of mirror image effect. So yeah, this is a nice, typically enigmatic Hypnosis sleeve, very glossy, laminated German copy. This is how it was released in the USA, with the band's names on the front and no gatefold. This is half live and half studio. It opens with an extended, almost 13-minute version of Hang On to a Dream from the third album, the Tim Hardin cover, followed by another Bob Dylan cover, a studio version of My Back Pages, which, again, they've stretched out. It's 9 minutes. Followed by a studio recording with the band only of the Tchaikovsky piece that was on the previous album, the third movement from the Pathétique, and followed, or concluded, with a devastating 10-minute version of America. And this one is just absolutely killer. Emerson just destroys his organ on this recording. You hear the sounds of a Hammond organ being absolutely tortured. And after that big, bombastic overture of the Dvorak theme that they use as an introduction to the piece, suddenly the tempo just speeds up, and Emerson races through the theme, and you hear him lifting up one side of the Hammond and dropping it to the stage to cause the springs to vibrate and create these horrible explosions and crashing noises. And one of my favorite techniques that he would do on the organ was these sweeps or glissandos, where he would just run one hand up and down the keys of the organ to produce a mighty whooshing sound. And I always loved that effect. In 1972, Charisma released this compilation, Autumn 67 to Spring 68. This consists mostly of material from the first album, supposedly alternate versions. Most of them I find pretty indistinguishable from the album versions, except for Dawn, which is a very different mix. That's the poetry over psychedelic electronic freakouts. And there is also a very different version of Daddy, Where Did I Come From the Ars Longa Vita Brevis album. There's a lengthy monologue very funny monologue in the album version. This version just has basically a dirty joke. And the B-side track, Diamond Hard Blue Apples of the Moon, which is one of the strangest tracks I ever heard on the sound system at Trader Joe's. And the nicest version of America fills it out. But that posthumous release was the last of the Nice. Emerson, of course, went on to Emerson, Lake and Palmer. Lee Jackson formed his band Jackson Heights. There's their first album. Brian Davison formed a band called Every Which Way. Jackson and Davison were reunited in Refugee, with Patrick Moraz more or less taking the place of Keith Emerson in a band that was very much sort of that missing link between the Nice and Emerson, Lake and Palmer. The band reunited for a private function, I think in the late 90s, but they never performed again in public until 2002, when they did a reunion tour in England. I saw them in London. There's my giant ticket stub. It's a big ticket item. And that tour resulted in this release, a triple CD, 2 CDs of the actual concert. This was not recorded at the show I saw, but in Glasgow. And the third CD being an interview with the band and Chris Welch. Title is Vivacitas, if you speak scholarly Latin, or Vivacitas, if you, like me, grew up in the Catholic Church, back when they had Latin. Or if you Google this word, which apparently is Latin for vivacity, you get mostly results for a healthcare concern, which pronounces it Vivacitas. So take your pick. I don't know how the band intended it to be pronounced, but it's very cool to get the concert. The show opened, it was actually billed as Keith Emerson with the Nice, so it was going to be 2 sets. It opened with the Nice, consisting of Emerson, Davison, and Jackson, plus Dave Kilminster on guitar. and they performed their set, and it was amazing. They did like everything I wanted them to hear. They did She Belongs to Me. They did Country Pie. They did the Corelia Suite. And of course, they opened with the big America and Rondo. Those are their two signature tunes that they absolutely had to do. That was followed by a solo piano set by Keith Emerson of just a couple of pieces. And then Emerson's own band came out, also with Dave Kilminster on guitar, and played a set of Emerson, Lake and Palmer material. And then for an encore, both bands combined, so there were two drummers, two bass players, Dave Kilminster and Keith Emerson, for a version of Fanfare for the Common Man and Honky Tonk Blues. There have also, in the 21st century, there have been many, many compilations by the Nice. If you go through the vinyl bins, you'll see tons of best ofs and just various sorts of compilations of the Nice. There have been some assorted posthumous releases in the 21st century, including recordings of BBC sessions. This one on the Receiver label is a real mess. They did a very bad job of identifying some of the songs that are not from the Nice's albums. This includes a song they title Better Than Better, written by Unknown. It is actually Get to You by the Byrds, in an amazing version that would have been right at home on the Elegy album and should have been released. Sombrero King, written by Unknown, which is actually Sombrero Sam by Charles Lloyd, and Aries by Unknown, which is actually from Mort Garson's Zodiac Cosmic Sounds album. This is another selection of BBC recordings. Both of these are single CDs, and there are too many sessions to fit on a single CD, so each of these has material that's not on the other. Hold that right side up. There have also been some live releases from the vault. This one from 1968, the Swedish radio sessions. And this is very cool because in addition to selections from their albums, She Belongs to Me, Flower King of Flies, Thoughts of Emerlist, Davjack, and Rondo, and they also do Sombrero Sam. They do You Keep Me Hangin' On, a cover of a cover, because they're obviously doing the Vanilla Fudge version of You Keep Me Hangin' On. And this set from the Fillmore East 1969, this is where a lot of the live recordings on the canonical albums came from. Well, let's go through some single releases by the Nice. This is their first single, Thoughts of Emerlist, Davjack, backed with Azrael, Angel of Death. And this is one of those fold-over type sleeves. This is from Holland on the Stateside label. The same cover picture, and this is with that saran wrap photo session. This being a Swedish version of the same coupling. And here is a US white label promo version, again with Azrael, Angel of Death on the B-side. America, backed with Diamond Hard Blue Apples of the Moon. Promo copy of America, backed with Diamond Hard Blue Apples of the Moon. And here's a French single. It's a little hard to tell what's going on in that photo. They're holding children who are wearing masks of John F. Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, and Martin Luther King. This is very 1968, sad to say. And here is a very scarce Japanese version of the same coupling. As is typical of the Japanese releases, it's just a fold-over picture sleeve with a plain sleeve inside. And this is on red vinyl. the immediate label. And there have been many reissue versions. Here's one from the UK with the standard B-side. Here's one from, is this Dutch? No, this is from Belgium, I think. Golden Hit Parade with Rondo on the B-side. And this one I think is Dutch. This has the, doesn't have any country listed on, but it has the Stemra publishing info with Hang On to a Dream as the B-side. Here is Brandenburger and Happy Freuds from the Ars Longa Vita Brevis album, and this copy is from Sweden, and it is autographed by Lee Jackson and Brian Davison. Unfortunately, I was not able to meet Mr. Stuck-Up Sticky Beat Keith Emerson. Diary of an Empty Day and Hang On to a Dream from the third album. Nice action shot of Mr. Emerson there, manhandling his Hammond. And there's Hang On to a Dream with Diary of an Empty Day again. This being, where is this from? Holland. This is a Dutch copy. What was the last one? The last one was French. And a German edition of Hang On to a Dream and Diary of an Empty Day. UK pressing of Country Pie, not listing the Brandenburg as part of it, with one of those people on the flip. Now we're on to the Charisma label and the material from the Five Bridges album. And here's the same coupling from Holland. Great photograph. This is one of my favorite sleeves from this collection. Here is a US white label promo of Country Pie. No indication that that's the A side, but we'll assume it is. The other side is the finale from the Five Bridges suite. So I'm going to sign off. The low battery light is blinking. I gotta go. Thank you for watching. Be well. Talk to you again soon. Bye-bye for now.